Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. We provide secrets for how to build AI products that customers value. In this episode, you'll learn why the next frontier of AI will be interpreting human behavior, the possibilities and use cases of emotional AI technologies, the importance of building specialized models in a world dominated by OpenAI, Google, Meta, and Anthropic.
Our guest today is Paula Petcu, CEO and co-founder of Interhuman AI. Interhuman AI develops the social intelligence layer for AI applications. She's been working at the intersection of health and technology for the past 10 years.
Please follow us on your favorite podcasting apps and make sure to leave a review if you like this type of product and career advice. This episode was brought to you by PH1 Research, specialized in rapid research to improve product decisions about your next AI release, validate use cases, test concepts, and prove monetization opportunities. Email info@ph1.ca and mention the Design of AI podcast to get a 15% discount. This episode was hosted by Brittany Hobbs and Arpi Draghi-Guerrero.
Hi, Paula. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to give the listeners just a quick description of Interhuman and what you're building.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. At Interhuman AI, we're building the social intelligence layer for AI applications. That is basically, if you think about it, giving AI ability to see and hear and really understand the social signals that we naturally look for when we have such a conversation, right? Looking at facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, seeing the smiles, the frowns, the potential confusion or hesitation. We take that for granted when we communicate as humans, both in person and here virtually. But it's a lot of the information that we transmit, right? There is some research that 93% of the communication that we do is actually non-verbal. Verbal 7%, and then the rest is looking at body language and tone of voice and all these aspects that matter a lot. And what we do is basically give AI solutions, systems, the ability to interpret these signals so they can adapt in real time. That's our focus.
Can you tell us a little bit about the current climate of founding an AI startup in Europe, including the regulatory environment and societal perceptions of AI?
Indeed, the European landscape is quite complex, but also exciting. We're seeing a lot of startups born in Europe that are working at the intersection of AI and various applications, different use cases. But with the EU AI Act and other regulatory challenges, it can be quite complicated for a startup with limited resources to navigate. We are one of those startups with Interhuman AI, and it's quite fascinating on how to navigate this landscape.
So, Paula, given that you're operating in Europe, I know there are a lot of different data management considerations. This week, there was news that TikTok was handed down a $600 million fine in terms of mismanaging data. Is it harder to manage data in Europe, or is it easier because of these guidelines?
It's both, if that's possible in a way. So let me give you a bit of background. I come more from the regulated environment of a pharmaceutical company. So I think that these regulations are actually good. It's for the good of the people living here that we respect the privacy, we have control over data. So these are super important regulations and are here to protect us. But it does sometimes slow down innovation and implementation. So those are kind of the challenges when you're a startup. How do you navigate these? I think that having that understanding of what these guidelines actually mean for a company and how to interpret them. So if they're guidelines or must-haves, there are different levels on how you should interpret them. And that's super important that the startups have that advice, either internally or external advice on how to navigate those. It is also an opportunity for startups that really understand these guidelines and regulations on how to differentiate themselves. This perspective of the customers here, the bigger companies, will have certain requirements when you try to sell to them. It's fine to start with some other startups selling to smaller companies and putting your product in use. But when it comes to selling to enterprises, looking at GDPR, looking at the EU AI Act, ISO certifications, and all of that, it's a must.
You've spent the majority of your career working in digital health in some form. How did you pick this path? It's not the sexiest path, but it is one that adds a ton of benefit to the world. Is your goal more to humanize technology, or are you someone that's trying to expand human capability with AI?
I think digital health is sexy. I do think so, because for me, it's about using technology for good and helping people. So, with my background in computer science, logical thinking, we can build products. My superpower is to build something, build software, hardware that helps other people in the world. And one of my first interactions with using technology for good was during my master thesis. I was working with the researchers at the Danish Technical University, where we were implementing a search solution that was focused on helping clinicians diagnose difficult medical cases. The kind of cases that you see in Dr. House TV series, if you heard that one, the difficult cases. And it was actually called Find Zebra. There is actually a line in Dr. House that you hear hopes it's not horses, it's zebras. That project actually got a lot of attention because we were comparing our solution to what clinicians in those days were using, like Google and PubMed, and we were much better in providing the relevant answers. And one of the things we got and was really powerful was actually emails from people that have used the solution and finally got a diagnosis after many years of not knowing what they have, going from one doctor to the other. And finally, they got a diagnosis using a solution together with their clinician. That is super impactful. Can we use technology for good to improve our social interactions, improve the way that we understand it ourselves and each other, to help in our lives? And that is a common thread, I think, in what I've been inspired to do, then more in digital health in a pharmaceutical company, how to better understand people, how we can help them, give some data back, and so on. And now it's Interhuman AI as well, on how we can help people better understand themselves and each other through social intelligence.
I'd love to dig a little more, though, into this idea of humanizing technology versus augmenting humans, right? And you mentioned a lot about this idea of using technology for good, but I think there's a lot of debate right now, especially when it comes to things like emotional AI or daily data intensive types of AI implementations. And if we think about emotional AI or effective computing, one of the early people really impacting effective computing, her quote was, "I've been on this mission to humanize technology before it dehumanizes us."
Yes.
Which is quite powerful, right? And so I'd love to hear, you mentioned about this idea of being able to use these privacy guidelines as a differentiator and as a way to be really impactful in the decisions that you're making as a startup founder. And you're also working in a space where it really has that potential to straddle the line between the two. Do you personally believe that the best way to use this technology for good is more on the side of humanizing technology, so making technology more human, or on augmenting and empowering humans to make smarter decisions?
I think it's obviously the one where you empower humans to make better decisions, but how you do that, it's very important. So instead of thinking of humanizing technology, it's more about making the technology understand humans. I think that's so much more powerful. Like, I've been playing also with robots, right, in my free time. If you see the video stream, you see a robot hat behind me. And that's an interesting experiment if you think about physical AI and the robots in the future. And do we want to actually have robots that look more like us? And why would we even do that? That's what I think about when we're saying we're humanizing the technology. Could be also more simple in the trend that we're seeing now with digital avatars used for various cases that look more human. But I think the more important part is to give the technology the ability to understand humans, because that's the scary part, I think. If we create something that looks like us, but it doesn't have the same intentions or doesn't understand us. So that's what we're working towards, giving the human understanding to the technology so it can enhance us.
Help us see your vision, right? Imagine 5 years in the future. What types of products do you expect to be built on top of your product?
Some examples could be in supporting sales agents, corporate training, supporting telemedicine platforms, and so on. We are at this layer where we're enabling other AI solutions. In the next 5 years, I expect that a lot of applications and products will be built upon us. So basically, Interhuman AI as the social intelligence layer being part of the tech stack of many of the interactions we have with technology.
I think that improving emotional AI must be really research intensive, and I hope it's very research intensive. The whole field of psychology is so fraught with changes and different ideas of what makes up emotions and how people create relationship and what it means. Before I go into some of the questions that are more on the technical side of it, I'd love to know, what is your process around even bringing in other specialists and people that sit within different parts of the whole concept of an emotion, so that you're making as a business and as a product towards something that you feel is that greater good that you mentioned earlier?
We are a very interdisciplinary team here at Interhuman AI, with both technical capabilities, but also working closely together with psychologists and behavioral scientists. The entire product that we're building now is based on research that was done by my co-founder, Professor Lina Clemenson. She's a researcher in AI and has been using her capabilities and her research applications within therapeutic setups. So basically working together with psychologists on looking at what can we see in terms of behavior and social signals from therapeutic setups. Looking at videos of therapy between the patient and the therapist, how do they communicate, how do they create a connection, like the therapeutic understanding of what's happening, the accountability, the support, everything that comes with that. So, and this is based on many years of research and data collection, which is very, very important to underline. It's crucial when you're building an AI company these days, that you look at what data you're building upon. And the research that we've done is looking at, okay, what kind of behavior do we see in people? There's this terminology called behavioral coding that is done by psychologists when they look at how people behave. A lot of the models that are available out there, they're looking at basic emotions like happy, sad, angry, disgusted, contempt, and so on. But it's very difficult for technology to really understand what's happening inside us. Those are internal feelings, emotions. What's more interesting and a bit easier is looking at behaviors. That's what we see on the outside. I'm showing that I'm confused or interested, or maybe I'm unsure about my emotions. Maybe I'm saying something, but my body says something different. And all of these are the more useful things that we can look at in real world applications. That is something also that the psychologists look at and react upon, and that I think that the socially intelligent solutions of the future will be interested in looking. Is it some hesitation, some confusion. Is there more interest? Should we adapt the message? How should you react to these things? And we have some research done as part of our company, as part of my co-founder's previous work. And it's something that we will continuously do. It's a continuous data collection loop where we're enhancing our models based on the data we collect and the feedback we get on how well it's done. So our company is also linked very much to the researchers and the research institutions here to ensure that the innovation that happens in that environment actually comes in our company and gets commercialized.
So we've heard a bit about emotional AI. It sounds like something that perhaps isn't ready yet. Can you give us a bit of a status update on what's possible today versus 5 years from now in terms of what this technology can do?
This domain of effective computing and emotional AI is not new. If you look back in computer vision models and analysis of signal processing, you can look at the different aspects and different labels that people have put on the interactions, like basic emotion analysis of angry, sad, and so on. Or you're looking at sentiment analysis from text and voice. Is it positive or negative? What we can do more of now is combining that with large language models and actually using that signal in terms of emotions and social behavior to make an adaptive system. The complexity of it increases as we add these additional layers and we do the fusion of models as well. So looking at emotions or social signals from facial expression, from tone of voice in real time, and looking at, is there some incongruence maybe between emotions, or do we get a stronger signal from multiple modalities? That we've seen a change, that we are able to do this much faster with better data, and we're able to combine it in more interesting ways, more useful ways than we could before.
So do you find then that you're more likely to have a correct response by looking at the changes from what's expected, or the changes or the disparate, let's say there's an expectation from facial recognition, but then a different expectation from the voice, tone of voice, or the words being used, or picking up of sarcasm, things like that? Do you find that then the accuracy lies somewhere in the differences between those, or the differences between expected and actual? Or is there something else that's going on?
This is an active area of research and really fascinating, because it's an area where it's very difficult to know the ground truth of emotions and behavior. And even if you ask evaluators, in many cases, they will not agree. So it's difficult to then do an AI system with that kind of ground truth myth, and you would expect them to perform even better. That's impossible. I think it's a super interesting area because from one point of view, you expect that the more signals you get from voice, audio, text, that the fusion of that will basically give you stronger confidence in the result. And you can also analyze it in terms of which signal is useful to look at depending on what social behavior you're expecting. Do you put more trust on the voice if you think about looking at authority or something in a conversation? That needs to be a balance. But I think it's super interesting to look at situations where you find this ambiguity. You get different results from the different models. And there could be that it's just something went wrong. It did not pick up on things. But the other interesting thing is that it might tell you something about the person that is being evaluated, that there is something that they don't realize yet. And this is something that happens sometimes in coaching situations, or with a therapist. You go to a therapist and they look at how you sit on the couch, your behavior, and so on, your body language. and you're telling them something, for example, oh, I'm happy about this promotion, but your tone of voice and body language says something different, right? So then they would normally pick up on that and ask gently, is there something more to that? Something bothering you, something more you expected, and diving deep into that. And that's, I think, a very interesting area where, again, we have these outputs. If you think about the technology stack, we have these outputs from the different models. If they say something different, could that be because the person doesn't realize yet that there is a misalignment in themselves? And I think that's a good use case when you think about coaching. Using an empathic coach, especially in digital health applications, to support the work that you anyway do with your coach and therapist, but in between sessions to kind of have this 24/7 support, someone that listens to you and is bringing up these.
A lot of our listeners are builders, and one of the consistent problems, I guess, in the current ecosystem is there's such concentration of power in the foundational models. And you're building something that's rather distinct and hyper focused. Is there an expectation that the LLMs will eventually consume this type of knowledge to be able to take on your capabilities? Or is the expectation from the academia world that these types of specialized models are necessary to develop outside of the frontiers?
I have maybe a biased perspective given my previous experience working with search engines, which is, again, you feed some data and then you get an output that should solve a problem. And what we found also when I was working in my earlier master thesis project is that creating vertical applications, focusing on a problem, getting high quality data gives you much better results. I think in the future, when you look at the large language models, for sure, they will be looking at integrating more empathic language, being there as companion, looking at these social intelligence aspects. But there will be also a question of the data that they have to parse. And there, where you look at specialized models, like we are fully focused on the social intelligence, that's where we have a competitive advantage. And that's where I think also other builders will win in terms of thinking about the data collection, this flywheel kind of model where you start with something, you bring value, more users come to your product because it brings value. And then through that data, with their consent, you can improve your models, which drives more users to your platform. I think builders should think of that and how they can incorporate that in their product early on, because the data will be key in the future when you have something that is not on the open internet that can be crawled by some of the bigger players because they have the money to pay the fees.
So help me understand the specialized ecosystem, because you have yourself trying to build a very distinct data set about interpreting emotional cues. And then you have a group like Sesame who's trying to work through the problem of conversational voice, where it interacts with what's happening in a much more natural way. What do you suspect is the future for all these hyper specialized models? Is the intention that the foundational model will be the marketplace through which we interact with each other? Or is there another vision for how these specialized data sets will interact with one another?
I think it will be pieces of a bigger architecture. So when developers build, they will have to choose what is important for them and then pick the right combination of things. In a similar way, the developers now, they need to choose the right tech stack for them, depending on what they want to build, who for, and on which platform. So I think it will be a combination of things, and there's enough room for the small players to support this more specific niche cases.
And then there's a natural question that goes along with this is, if you as a builder are plugging into 6 models perhaps, how do you guarantee the quality and the management of your data in that kind of world?
Yeah, big question. But I think the important part is if we follow the same kind of guidelines, right? If you look at the standard guidelines for managing of data, where do you store it, interoperability requirements as well. Those are actually quite important and very useful. So you can see also the upside of all these regulations here, the need to be able to export data from one system to the other. That will actually be key for when you have to integrate with multiple solutions.
I want to ground it in some of the things that you were talking about a minute ago about needing to pull from different sources. So in 2024, the University of Groningen's Speech Technology Lab was working on a model to identify sarcasm. That's obviously one of the hardest things for even humans to be able to interpret a lot of the time. And they were able to get it to a point where it could recognize sarcasm accurately about 75% of the time. That means that 25% of the time it doesn't. And that's still a really good success rate. But when we're thinking about health, when we're thinking about mental health, coaching, all of these spaces where a 25% failure rate is actually not very good, right? And especially if you're talking about having to pull from all of these different sources, there's the risk of getting it wrong can still be quite high. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on when we think about the risk of inaccurate responses, where do you feel like we're potentially going to be under-delivering in that 5-year time horizon? And in particular, I think you mentioned something before that was really intriguing to me as someone who works in this kind of research and cognitive science space, is when things are wrong or when it identifies something accurately, as a human practitioner, you will be able to gauge when is the right time to divulge something that you understand versus when you shouldn't. What I'm seeing in what you've said is there's two things, is the risk of getting things wrong or the risk of getting things right and divulging them in the wrong time. Can you talk about how you're thinking about some of those behavioral impacts?
Yes. So to look at the first question more on the challenges and accuracy, there are certain areas like healthcare, safety, defense areas where I think that the current algorithms, the current models are not good enough to be used in production. I know that there are some developers that are planning on researching these areas and putting things in production for mental health, for therapy, thinking of using this kind of signals. But it needs to be very careful, both in terms of large language models, but also the combination with social interpretation and so on. And yes, one thing is, does it get it right or wrong? And what happens if it gets it wrong? And how do you use that? So there are a lot of decisions for the developers to think about. My suggestion is whenever you have uncertainty, like the output of the models are quite different, you do not get to a certain confidence level, then the best thing to do is gather more information. Ask additional questions that if you have a conversational AI in which you in real time use this kind of technology, ask additional questions that can potentially increase the confidence in your output. And this is kind of building, like trying to get more evidence in either direction to confirm or disprove that hypothesis you have about what is happening. That's also the approach that we have taken in cases where it gets closer to coaching. Even if it's coaching for sales, it's not even healthcare or something like this. But ask more questions whenever the confidence threshold's too low. The second part of your question on when to reveal things, that's also a very, very interesting one. And one thing is looking at the social intelligence aspects from nonverbal communication. But I think on that respect, on when to answer, that will come more from the verbal communication. So from recorded interactions of words, when is the right time to act, that is something that can tell you more about, okay, we have this kind of information, what is the right next token? If you think about it in large language model that is super specialized on social intelligence and knowing when to act and when to say something. It's super interesting area and so many more things to do until we get to a time where we have systems that really understand and get it right 100%.
There's always been a natural divergence between the private sector and academia. And I'm sure some of the builders in this conversation are feeling like this technology is far away. So I think it might be good for us to just start grounding this in some use cases, if that would help. You've brought up customer service and sales. Help me imagine how a B2B builder might leverage emotional AI as a multimodal function in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of builders looking at sales agents and supporting the sales and customer service process using AI. That could be, for example, in AI solutions joining the sales calls to record and provide a report of what's happening. If you have real-time multimodal analysis of the conversation of the participants in a sales call, what you can do is actually in real time pick up on subtle clues on what's happening. For example, detect hesitation that is not verbally communicated, but might be some signals on the facial expressions and so on. And in real time, be able to act. The builder of the AI agent can think of these scenarios where the sales conversation can be improved by this analysis of real-time data of social signals. So you can have better sales calls and close faster. So that links directly to business value for a lot of organizations.
And are you imagining that this coaching would happen in real time as the call is happening, or it'd be a post kind of analysis situation?
It's actually before, during, and after. One of our customers is doing training with potential customers, avatars, before they actually go in the stores. So you can train using role plays with avatars and try to pick up on tone of voice, body language. It provides feedback in real time on maybe don't look that negative or surprised when the customer objects and so on. So that they train before they go out in stores. And that use case is super important when you think about the onboarding period of a lot of people in sales. The other use cases would be real time, that you get that feedback and summarization of what's happening. You can redirect the discussion in the meeting to what matters. And then you can have the post processing of the interaction. And we see many solutions in that space that's easier to make in a way than real-time analysis. And there you can get insights on opportunities you have missed, what was the attention and so on, so you know for the next call. Or a manager of the sales representative can look at how the person has performed and give feedback to them and train more. And then you can go back to the loop of, okay, these are the aspects, the skills that I'm missing. Maybe I can train with an AI avatar, become better at that, and then go back into the sales calls.
So one of the main criticisms when it comes to something like sales calls and recording that is the data privacy side of it. So in order to give these sales or customer service professionals the advice that they need, you're having to collect quite a lot of data around biometrics, facial recognition, all of that. How are you thinking about or preparing to overcome that?
Yeah, that's a great question on the privacy. And coming again from the pharma space and looking at privacy and safety for patients first, the way that we are addressing this is doing real-time analysis and not saving the audio or video once it's processed in these more sensitive cases where privacy is very important. So all the processing is done in real time. You get the feedback on the screen, you get the weights, the confidence levels of different social signals. You can use that in the reports and everything, but no video or audio is being saved.
In this case, is it also that you're only doing the analysis on the salesperson in order to allow for proper authentication of that? Or is it because it's not being saved, there's sort of a gray line?
It's up to also the developers on how they want to implement and which person in the meeting to look at and so on. So that's a decision on the implementation side. What we provide is basically an API that can be used for all these use cases. And then the developer decides on how to manage this.
You've brought up coaching many, many times, and you've brought up again here training. It seems like so much of the value here is perhaps less so from unique situational learning. And by that, I'm saying if a single customer comes to you, you're probably not going to get as much learning from that one interaction as you would from evaluating a salesperson or a frontline worker of some form over several weeks. Is that where you're imagining the value will more so come from?
Yes, the applications are in different areas. Now we talked about digital health a bit, corporate training, sales, customer service. And our approach is also to go to the developers, the ones that are building platforms for others, rather than building directly with, okay, this hospital requires this application. We let someone else build that application and we come in with especially at the layer where it can enable multiple interactions, so larger data sets and more conversations over time. Because indeed, as you say, that's where we learn the most. And also, if you think about personalization over time, that's also very important. Getting to know the person, the human over time, because we're all different. There are some commonalities in terms of the social interaction and so on, but there's also some individuality and learning how you react, how you respond to things. That's very important over time to have a system that knows how to help you.
The more I'm listening to this conversation, I'm thinking it's about training your team to have better soft skills. Is there academic research to support that teams can be trained to really elevate the level of their interpersonal communication in ways that benefit their employers?
Yes, so there are some studies also from Stanford University on using chat-based role plays in this case for conflict resolution. And it's super interesting what they found. So they had a group that was trained in this kind of conflict resolution strategies just by watching some videos, the standard that you have in corporate training, that HR puts out videos and quizzes and so on. And then the other group was trained using role plays and an interactive way in which you can actually learn different conflict strategies and so on. And they have results that show that those that did the role plays, that did the practice, was much better in using collaborative ways in finding a solution. So they learn better on how to approach things. And this is related to the skills that we develop in teams and how we communicate with each other. Now, this study was only done on text, right? Imagine if you can add these additional layers where you practice on facial expressions and tone of voice, the entire body language and everything when you go into those situations. Then the impact would be even bigger, I expect, compared to one single modality. And indeed, it's a use case that is very, very interesting on the soft skills and something that will be increasingly important in the future as all of us will be enhanced by AI in our workplaces, right? But how we communicate with each other, aligning, ensuring that we work together, that is still on us. And we need to be good at that. So AI here has the opportunity to teach us something about ourselves.
Help me imagine this, because I work a lot in workflow analysis. And typically what happens in an organization is you'll find that there are some high performers and then there's lower performers. And the high performers have unlocked some capability, some approach, some cadence, some speech pattern that performs at a higher conversion rate than others.
Mhm.
How do they interact with the LLM and your model to set a new benchmark for success?
Yeah, there's a level of personalization, right? On where you are as an individual and identifying which are the areas where you need to improve. And when you think about this in practice, these high performers, they might have different aspects, different perspectives on how much they should use an AI solution, right? If you think about it. It could be that they think they don't need it and it's just a push from HR. And then it's of course more difficult to support them. The other thing that happens for people as they go further up in the organizations, they get less feedback. When you're an intern, you get a lot of feedback, you have this weekly syncs and so on. First time manager, you're still supported and so on. Once you get to VP level, like go higher and higher, the less feedback you get. And how do you grow from there? How do you know if you're doing things right or not? And do you dare ask? I talked with many CEOs that say that, okay, it's kind of lonely. So having a sparring partner, a coach, an AI that can support can be very useful. And that's where you can see, even if you're a high achiever, there's still so many things to learn and discover.
It's really fascinating. There's been a lot of research around the value of using VR, for example, for training, and just the sheer improvement in the quality and speed of employee interactions and employee work after these visualization trainings. It's an interesting place to look at, well, how do we perhaps make that more personalized and mirror that into this engagement role play where people can interact and train themselves through that?
We have evidence that it works. It's engaging and putting people in a scenario where they need to practice. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but it's this way of learning. It's experiential learning that you can't beat that. You can't beat experience. That is something that makes you more confident. You have some prior knowledge when you actually need to act in the real world. It's super useful. By adding this social intelligence layer of actually it reacts more realistic when you do these VR sessions with avatars and so on. The more realistic it gets, the more powerful it will be, and you know how to react on real scenarios in the future.
Yeah. So it seems really clear the value of emotional AI when it comes to things like sales training or coaches and training in general, right? What are some use cases for emotional AI that you feel will really positively impact the world that we haven't discussed? Perhaps some use cases that might surprise people listening.
I am personally super interested in physical AI and how we can use this kind of technology in 5 years, let's say, where we have more interactions with AI solutions, whether it's in healthcare, in telemedicine, in physical robots moving around, supporting us and actually understanding us. And I think that will be amazing. Like having solutions around us that really know how to react without telling them to. So imagine a hospital situation where a robot now is assigned to go from room A to room B, but a fire or something happens and everyone needs to go out. What would the robot do right now? It's basically going from room A and B. That was the assignment, right? But being able to detect that something is happening, I need to readjust based on how people look, feel, do the social interaction, taking that in and reacting. That is where it's really integrated in the system and supportive rather than another task to do. Oh, yeah, I need to go on the fire escape. but I need to stop the robot. I am super excited about that and how will that play out in the future.
It's undeniable that there's value to be gained here in terms of elevating the benchmark, assessing behavior longitudinally. But there obviously would be some critics that would say that A, why do we want to automate some of these roles and services? And then B, there might be risks of people interacting with technology rather than experts, let's say in the case of therapy. What do you say to these kinds of concerns?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is support people, and it's not about replacing existing jobs or a therapist and so on. It's more providing additional support and speeding up some of the processes. It's very costly to companies to spend time on some sales processes, onboarding, a lot of time being lost where we can optimize some things. And every company has a sales department, right? So if you think about that use case. And then on the therapeutic side, there again, we need to be very careful and the technology is not ready. So always having a human in the loop and using the solution as something that is supporting the rest of the workflow and the rest of the process, because it's not ready to take over. What it can do is extend the support that humans can provide by having this 24/7 availability. So looking at what technology is really good at and focusing on that rather than using it to replace people.
I'm sure there's some builders listening who are excited now about multimodal and emotional AI. Do you have any guidelines you'd like to suggest to them so that they know how to effectively use this technology and also ethically use it as well?
Yeah, so what I recommend if they would like to look at the general field of effective computing, one of the books that I read and really like is Effective Computing by Rosalind Picard. She's been working in this area for many years, and it gives a lot of inspiration on how humans and technology can interact. In terms of implementing emotional intelligence, people can also check out our website, of course, interhuman.ai, and try things out. I think before you put anything in production, try it out, and not only on you yourself as a developer, but try to get some diversity in. And we haven't talked much about this, but there's also a lot of testing that needs to be done before you put something in production. Testing in terms of the outputs, the interactions, it's getting user feedback. Does it actually make sense? Are the conversations good enough? Are the models giving the right output, the interaction speed, and so on? But also potential bias that there is in the model and discovering that early on. We discussed earlier about the individualization part, right? The personalization. You as individual might react differently to different situations. So it's important to learn over time. And that is something that developers need to take into account. Don't make too many assumptions too early. Try to embed some kind of personalization in your application if possible. And then look at the kind of audience that you serve. What is the best kind of interaction for them? Is it text-based? Is it video, audio only? And what would you like to prioritize more depending on the situation and over time? And test. I know it's the boring part of it, but so important. We've done research also on bias and looking at the different models that we use and how do they perform when you put them in different devices. So if you have smartphones with not so good cameras compared to like the newest generation, like can you actually detect emotions and social signals from that? So if you look at that device range, you look at the light situation, the noise level around, all of these things, ensure that you test in different environments and for your specific use case before you put in production. And there are tools out there. We also provide some benchmarks and support with like how we tested the models and so on.
It sounds like the evaluation list and the QA list that you're recommending is much more robust, which I think makes a lot of sense. And from a privacy, from a bias, and just from a usability perspective, will be increasingly important for people building in this space to really consider. So thank you for outlining so much of that. Where can our listeners go to learn more about your work in general? What's the best place for them to look for your research and the work that you're doing?
To learn more, go to our webpage, interhuman.ai. You will find information about our company, how to get access to the API, and we also link to the research publications that we have already worked on and upcoming projects.